Good morning, everyone. The webinar will begin in 5 minutes. While waiting, I encourage you to download the handout available under the Handouts tab on the control panel. Brian will be referring to it often during the presentation, and you can take notes on it. While we wait for the webinar to begin, we do have Brian Harrell with us. Brian, with many organizations continuing to work remotely, what are some of the challenges of communicating with a remote team?
Hi, Patrick. Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I actually am part of almost daily. In fact, just last night, I have a colleague in London, and we had to come together to discuss a few things. And I wasn't done with my day until about 9 p.m. last night, and so in order for us to meet, it was a challenge for him to be part of 9 p.m. in Eastern Standard Time is not 9 p.m. in London. And so we always have to be mindful of time and the time it takes to work with our colleagues and the time it is in their places. I think that's one of the things that we don't take into consideration as much as the other stuff. The other stuff is, we can do things on Google Docs. There's 100 things that we can use to share files and to get things done on our own time. But when we actually physically have to come together in a synchronous space, we have to be mindful of each other. I work with people in the Central Standard Time most days of my week. And while it's only an hour difference, when I'm awake at 9 a.m. trying to complete things and I want to do things right away, it's 8 a.m. for them. And while at my 8 a.m. was taking kids to school and making sure that my family life was taken care of, I now have to be mindful at 9 a.m. that they have family life too. And so I think and I joke with many of my colleagues across the United States and across the world that I have jet lag every day because I'm constantly trying to maneuver between time zones.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for me, that's one of the biggest challenges. And we aren't awake 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Because if we were, I'd get a lot more done.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a learning process, and I don't think remote teams are going to be going away anytime soon. So I mean, people are going to need to really learn what you said about different time zones and communicating remotely with electronic communications instead of verbal too. So
no,
good.
absolutely. I mean, one of the things that prior to COVID, and I think that May of 2020 was a big pivot point. Up until then, we had to always be in the same room. Whether or not we'll be in Korea or in Green Bay or in Cleveland, we all needed to be in the same room to get things done. And so I was constantly on the road. I was in places that and away. Now I'm in my basement, not today, but I'm often in my basement doing the same things I was doing sitting in on a plane for 4 hours or 6 hours trying to get things done in order to accomplish the same things that we're doing in our basement. We're saving money. It's definitely something that's worthwhile. However, we do lose some things on that too, and I've seen physically some of my colleagues that I used to see a lot twice since May of 2020. And while we see each other on, on Zoom and on webinars and things like that, I don't think that's the same.
Nope. Okay, good. Well, we are right at time. So good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Effective Business Writing Techniques. Since we do want to continue to deliver these informational webinars for you and practice social distancing, we're delivering this webinar remotely. Your presenter, Brian Harrell, will be presenting from his office and me from mine. My name is Patrick Allen, and I'm the Program Manager for Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development's Public Open Enrollment Programs. Our center specializes in providing employee development for partnering organizations in Northeast Ohio and around the world. We offer training as both public open enrollment programs currently being delivered live and virtually via Zoom, and also customized programs delivered live and virtual or at your location. I am joined today by Kent State facilitator Brian Harrell. I will be serving as your host, and Brian will be our presenter for today. Brian has taught business and professional communication and writing skills for several years. Currently, he teaches writing foundations courses at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay, and teaches and tutors graduate students in writing and rhetoric at the Northeast Ohio Medical University in Rootstown. For Kent State University, Brian facilitates a program on today's topic, effective business writing techniques. Brian earned a bachelor's degree in English from Kent State University and a master's degree in English composition from the University of Akron. In his spare time, Brian officiates several high school and collegiate sports competitions. Everyone in attendance today has been muted to avoid background noise from any of the nearly 100 registered participants. We do encourage you to ask questions at any point during the hour. You can submit your questions to me in writing using the questions tab on the control panel on the right side of your screen. I will present your questions to Brian as time permits throughout the webinar. Again, there is a handout available to you that summarizes today's presentation. It's located under the Handouts tab on the control panel. We encourage you to download it as Brian will be referring to it during today's presentation. We are recording today's webinar, and you will receive an email next week with a link to the recording after we conclude our time together. And now I'd like to introduce Brian Harrell.
Thank you, Patrick, and welcome to Effective Business and Professional Writing Techniques. I was talking before about these issues with professional communications, and just yesterday I was given an email to go and take a quiz for college football officiating. And on that quiz, the quiz questions where we had some videos, and they asked a question about each video. And the question was, is this a legal play or is this a foul? And should I throw a flag on this or should I not? And then in the answer portion, it was true or false. They put true or false on it. And I cringed. Is this a foul, true or false? That doesn't make sense to me. And I think this is something that goes across the board, and kind of really thinking about what writing techniques we can be really good at that will enhance our communication in our business. So today we're going to kind of talk about four things: the why for professional communications, the who, the purpose, and then finally the how. So, why is effective business writing important in today's business world? I think if we were live and I asked that question, everybody in here would have 3 or 4, 5, 6 different answers as to why effective business writing is important, both from a facilitator, somebody who's doing the writing, and from somebody who's receiving the writing. It enhances relationships, right? It gives you the opportunity to create both business and professional and personal relationships with people, both in-house and on the market. It also increases employee engagement. The more communication we have from managers down will encourage employees to continue to talk. I've had several questions from managers over the years. How do I get my employees to communicate with me? And my only answer is you have to communicate with them first. I remember as a 17-year-old, 18-year-old boy, I was working in a packing house and we had plums and other fruits. And I was driving a forklift, and the only communications I would ever have with my bosses, my managers, was when I was doing something wrong. If I was driving the forklift a little bit too fast, if I was turning corners too slow or too fast or whatever. And so I learned at an early age, as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old worker, that communicating with the boss, the managers, can often be bad. And I think most of us have those stories of how did we learn to communicate with our bosses and our managers? It was usually a negative experience, especially as a young worker. So in order to change that culture, there's several companies that have come to me, how do I change that culture? I say to the managers, I say to the people who are asking, managers, reach out to your employees. You open up those avenues of communication. And when the employee comes to you, don't shut them down. Don't get angry because they have brought something to your attention. Listen, just as they have asked, you have asked them to listen to you. So, credibility in a company is extremely important. And this builds effective communication, and business writing builds company credibility. I can't tell you how many times over the last few weeks, few months, few years, I have received communications from different organizations, whether it be nonprofits or businesses trying to sell something, or my bosses, my University of Wisconsin Green Bay or Neomed, and there are errors in the writing. Don't get me wrong, I make errors all the time. In fact, I joke with my students and my colleagues that let me do everything first and then we'll revise off of my stuff, because we can't get any worse than what I'm going to produce first. The key is to read what you're going to send out to the public prior to sending it to the public and whoever those publics are. A couple of weeks ago, I received an email from a person who said, we need substitutes for Saturday because we've lost 3 workers to COVID. I said, oh my God. And I immediately emailed them. I said, I'm so sorry. And he's like, what are you talking about? I said, well, we lost 3 workers to COVID. And he says, oh no, they were exposed to somebody, and so they can't go and do the job. Talk about credibility. Talk about talk about a heart-wrenching email that was just meant to say, hey, 3 people can't go to work on Saturday. Can we get some subs? Talking about appropriate messages. How do you convey those appropriate messages? Being clear and concise. It inspires confidence in your company and in you. And it also improves efficiency and productivity. And most importantly, good, effective business communications, writing communications, assures that the messages are sent and received accurately. A few years ago, when I was on the job market, I applied for a position that was going to just be on weekends, and so didn't hear from them for about 6 months. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to get the job, no problem. And then in August, so that was probably in October or November that I applied for this job. I interviewed, I did everything that was asked of me. And in August, I started receiving a cryptic email asking me for my shoe size and my shirt size. It was from an organization I'd never heard of before in my life. And so I deleted that message thinking that it was spam. And a couple weeks later, I received another email. We have not gotten your shoe size yet and your shirt size yet. Well, you're not gonna get it. So I deleted it again. And then on August 30th, I received a phone call. Hey, we haven't received your sizes of your uniforms yet. You're starting to work on September 2nd. And I said, nobody told me I was hired. Well, we figured since we're asking you the size of your uniform size, that you would just kind of figure out that you've been hired. No, I didn't. And so while I did accept the job, and in fact, I still work for them today, I still question 5, 6, 7 years later some of their communication abilities. And I've joked with them a few times, if you ever want to send out emails to people, and if you want to just run it by me first, I'd be happy to read it. They have not taken me up on my offer. When we're thinking about communication in business and effective communication in business writing, there's two major parts that come into play that we have to be aware of: audience and purpose. This is the same thing for all communication. This is the same thing when we're writing, we're talking, when we're doing anything in any types of world. You need to know your audience. You need to know how to effectively communicate with your audience. And to do that, you need to know what your audience needs. So when we're thinking about business professional writing, there are three different types or categories, if you will, of audience: the primary, the secondary, and then the hidden. I think most of us know that the primary audience are the people who directly receive the message. They are the two, if you will. They are the people that you're completely aware of that are going to receive the message. And so if it's a colleague, an employee, your boss, a customer, a supplier, you have a pretty good idea most of the time how to communicate with them and what their needs are in order for you to provide them the message. But what about the viewer? Think about the CCs. Who are the people you CC, you carbon copy on your emails and your messages? Who are the people that the primary person that you're sending to is going to show and to ask for their opinions, their help? Who are those people? Those people also need to be in your sphere and when you're thinking about audience awareness. And finally, this idea of the hidden audience. This week, a famous NFL National Football League coach was fired because of emails he sent to the primary person. These emails were, at the very minimum, awful, racist, as we see now. But his primary audience thought that they were funny and they communicated. And yet, 7, 8, 12 years down the line, the hidden audience was all of us, was the people of the United States in 2021. What are you putting in emails? What are you putting in messages that 15 years from now might get you in trouble? And it's not even that, obviously. It's not even the trouble part. But who might see the message that you don't anticipate? Maybe you've announced something for a nonprofit about raising money for a nonprofit, and you send it to the primary person who is a manager at a large department store. And he shows to his people to talk about what they think they should do. And then they print your email out and put it on the board in the employee lounge. Those are your hidden audience. I will just encourage you that if you're writing to your hidden audience, the secondary and the primary will all fall in. So the primary are the decision makers. The secondary are the stakeholders. And then the hidden, those are the shadow readers. The shadow readers are the ones that we need to keep in our brain that we don't think about often when we're writing messages. So when we're writing an email or a message and we're trying to communicate, and whatever that communication might be, we need to know who's our reader. We just talked about that. We now need to think about, what do the readers already know about the subject? So if it's a brand new topic, what will you have to communicate with them? Well, there's going to be a lot to have to communicate, right? There's going to be things that you have to be aware that they don't know about you and your company, or that they didn't know happens in the company. I can think of several times that I've received emails and messages that I had to email back and say, wait, slow down. Let's start in the first half. I didn't realize that your department was in charge of XYZ. Oh yeah, that was changed, a year and a half ago. And so we had to start the communication way back here. All of that stuff on those initial emails that are brand new topics need to be communicated. Or is this a response to a topic that the reader brought up? Is this a reply email? What do they know about the subject? Probably a lot, but not from your end of it. So what do you have to communicate to them as a reply? Knowing and acknowledging in every message what is new information and what is old information is extremely important and necessary. And finally, what cultural issues should you address or avoid? I'm asked often. We talk about speeches, and we talk about when you stand up in front of a room, the old way to do it. It's probably still going on quite a bit, was to tell a joke. You break the ice. And so people ask me all the time, what type of jokes can we tell in professional communications, or what are some icebreakers? And I caution people all the time when you were thinking about jokes in a professional setting. What is funny to you perhaps is not funny to them. She might not like that, but you might think it's really funny. He might not think it's appropriate for the business world, but you think it's not a big deal. Cultural issues should be taken as really important. And so when we're identifying our audience, especially the hidden audience and the secondary audience. So if you have an employee who is working overseas, and let's say they're in London, like my colleague was last night. And while London has much of the same culture as the United States, there's a lot of differences. And so if they might be from the United States and over there for a short amount of time, but the people that he's working with or she's working with, the secondary audience or that hidden audience who might see that, might take offense to some things if you're not aware of that. I have a close friend who was born in Brooklyn, New York. She is of Indian descent. She's asked all the time, where are you from? And it offends her because she's from New York. Don't be that person, especially in professional business writing communications. So I like acronyms and audience. How do we, as we're writing and we're looking, and this doesn't have to be the first draft of your email. I know, the last time that you were told to write a first draft was probably in a writing class in college or in high school. Write a first draft and then a second draft and then have it peer reviewed, and then you could finally turn it in and we'll give you a grade and then you can revise it. Well, I'm here to tell you, once you hit send, there is no revisions. It's out there. So once you write and you draft an email, and I really believe that all business writing communications need to be drafted first. Write it and then read it out loud to yourself or to a colleague. And then when you're reading out loud to your colleague and you're thinking about before you send it, think about who are the recipients of your message. Analyze that. What is their knowledge? That's the understanding. What is their demographics? I said something in a class yesterday about the movie Rudy. I thought everybody knows Rudy. Many freshmen in college have never heard of Rudy. I know it's a surprise. However, there may be several people on this call that have never heard of Rudy. I need to be better at identifying cultural changes. What is their level of interest investment in your message? So what is it? What's in it for them? I receive lots of emails asking me to do more work that it's already on my plate. When somebody sends me an email asking me to do work with the expectation that I'm going to say yes, and it's obvious in that message, in that email, that they expect me to say yes, I'm put off by that. Doesn't mean I'm going to say no, but with the understanding that I may not want to. So understand, if all of the power is in the person you're sending this message to, recognize that. What setting or reality is your audience immersed in? What is the environment? If you don't know, then be very careful with that and understand at the highest level, what will they look at your message as? Have you taken cultural differences into consideration? What information does your audience need versus what information do you want to give them? How do you adjust your message to your audience? Customizing it. I joke with friends all the time that I have this, actually my friend who was born in Brooklyn. We have children in the same school, and we both get the same exact form letters asking us to do things. Sometimes it makes more sense that she got it the way it's written, and sometimes it makes more sense that I got it the way it's written. Form letters sometimes work. Personal messages, if you really want somebody to react to you and your message, it's much better and easier to personalize it. Cut and paste doesn't always work. And then what do you think, not your expectations, but your audience expectations? What do you think, how do you expect them to react? Now, once we get past audience awareness, when thinking about these things, we have to understand the purpose. What is the purpose of our message? Well, is the purpose of the message for a mass audience? That could be sent out as a news release, maybe, where the mass audience doesn't and isn't really able to react to you personally. Well, what if you want a mass release, but you want also to be able to interact with the public on this mass release? Social media is a great way to do it. If you're able to get it out and retweeted and shared by the right people. Websites. The greatest thing about a website is we have control over the information that we are disseminating. The hard part about a website is the public has to come to our website. And so instead of us putting out the information, we present the information and hope the audience comes to us. Can you see how there should be a difference in purpose for a news release versus social media versus a website? And then when we're talking one-on-one information, like emails, we need to keep our purpose in mind and think, what is our primary, secondary, hidden audience? Who are they? How are they getting this information? Are they somebody who sits at a desk every day on a laptop computer or a desktop computer, 14-inch, 15-inch, 16-inch screens? Do they have 4 different screens going on at the same time? The purpose of our communication needs to take into effect. Are they reading our emails on computers? Are they reading it on their phones? Which I hate to tell everybody this if you don't know this already, but 95%, up to 95% of all of our business communications are being read on phones, especially if it's not between 9 and 5 their time. So how do we change our message to be read on a phone versus on a 16-inch computer screen? Are they reading them on tablets, which also come with their own fun? One thing I'm going to share with you as we think about these things, when your person that you're communicating with reads an email on a computer screen, 14-inch, 15-inch, they can see the whole sentence all at once. Perhaps the whole paragraph, perhaps all 6 paragraphs, but they can't on a phone. Does that change how you communicate? Yeah. So, what is the mesh point? Where does audience and purpose come together? That is the how. How are we communicating these different things between professional messages, persuasive messages, bad news messages, and we're going to talk about bad news messages for a couple minutes. We hate to do them, but they're the hardest. And then we'll talk about social media and then also collaborative report writing as we go forward in the next 20 minutes or so of what we're doing here. So, Patrick, here's a poll question for everybody. When considering professional messaging and messages, the professional message, which of these things should not be considered when writing the message? The length of paragraphs, using lists when possible, making sure the email or message contains all the necessary information, making sure that email or message contains the respondent's next steps, or make sure you're using upper and lower case, and for all the sake of all things professional, capitalize proper nouns. So the poll is now open.
Yep, so go ahead and select your best answer, and once the majority have voted, I will show the results. Okay, just a few more seconds and I will close the poll. Okay, so Brian, it looks like 78% say use long paragraphs, usually about 14, 16 lines per paragraph. Tied with 9% is use lists when possible and use upper and lower case and capitalize proper nouns. 4% make sure the email contains the necessary information, and 0 make sure the email contains the respondent's next steps.
Awesome. So the answer to that is, which should we not think about and not do is use long paragraphs. And so the majority hit that. I think probably there was perhaps some confusion because we definitely want to capitalize our proper nouns. Me as an English teacher is talking here. When writing a professional message, 4 ideas that I would like to share is making the subject line informative. When somebody writes on the subject line, Brian, this is for you, I probably will get to it at 4:59 p.m. if I'm leaving at 5. But if the subject line says, Brian, I need to talk to you about our meeting on Thursday, as opposed to maybe meeting on Thursday. Okay, so your subject line needs to be informative. It doesn't have to be this big, grand, spectacular, punch them in the face, you need to read this, but there needs to be information in the subject line. Then use specific salutations. If you've never met the person face to face, use formal greetings. There's nothing worse on my end of things as we effectively communicate in writing. If somebody I don't know emails me or messages me or sends me a letter that says, "Hi, Brian, I don't know you. I might get a chance to know you." But immediately, if the subject line is not informative in an email, or if I have somebody who doesn't use specific salutations, the effectiveness of that message leaves because I no longer care about reading it, especially if I've never met that person face to face. Using short paragraphs, no more than 6 to 8 lines per paragraph or less, is important, especially when we're thinking about how we are getting the purpose of our message across, specifically what they're reading it on. And lists are a good thing. If we have to explain something to somebody and we want somebody to take some steps, bullet point those, or 1, 2, 3 for them. Think about when you're reading emails, 1 12-sentence paragraph versus 2 lines, 5 bullet points, and a salutation, "Get back with me." To get our emails and our messages across effectively. Make sure the email contains all the necessary information. Make sure the email contains the respondent's next step, what they should be. I can't tell you how many times I've received emails and messages from somebody who tells me all of this awesome stuff, but I don't know what's next. When you're revising your emails before you send them and you're editing them, take a look. Make sure that it's clearly communicated what you want the respondent to do. Use that closing. Say, and people ask me all the time, what's the best way to close an email? We have our signature there often. I always use the word cordially. I think cordially is a professional way to do it, and it's a little bit less formal than others. So cordially is the one I always give. Always include your name after the closing, even if it is the 10th email of a thread. And most of us have signatures that already do that. One last thing, when writing dates, always put the year. Too many times you and I will write, "Hey, Brian, I need you to go do this on October 10th. Well, okay. So then we always, I know a lot of people either save emails in files, thus in 15 years, we might have to go back to them, or you print them out. I know of people who have office managers who print out their emails and put it in a file. Well, once in a while, it's just the text. And so all of a sudden, October 10th, what year? So always include years. Now, the second poll question, And we're thinking about bad news messages here. And sometimes we just have to give bad news. Sometimes somebody wants us to do something and we can't do it. So, like, think about if you're in a company and you have a long time customer who wants you to give them 8% discount because they've been a long time customer and they're buying a bulk item. But for you to make money, you have to sell it. You know, you've got a 7% or 7.5% place there, and giving them 8%, you'll lose money, a lot of money, and you have to tell them, no, I can't. So how do you do that? Or that customer who wants to return something to you 6 months after they purchased it, and they want to send it back to you via Amazon, or, you know, from an Amazon purchase that they use from your company. So which one should not be included in the message? Should you start a statement with the recipient is likely to agree? Should you state clearly something that is being asked for? Should you not clearly state the word no? Should you not offer an alternative if possible? Or should you not end your letter on a courteous, friendly, and constructive note and do not apologize? Which one should you not do?
Okay, just a few more seconds. It looks like the majority of people are voting. All right. Okay, 48% say clearly state the word no in your message. 38% start with a statement to which the recipient will agree. And then 5% for the remaining three categories: state clearly what is being asked for, offer an alternative, and end with a courteous, constructive tone, but do not apologize.
Awesome. So the answer will be C. You should never flat out and come out and say the words no when talking about, you know, when communicating bad news. There's others ways to do it. So starting with a statement that the recipient is likely to agree with. Hi, John. It's great to hear from you again. I know that we both want this to go well. Yeah, we both do. Okay, you know, I know we both want this purchase and this meeting or whatever to accomplish this. Here's the purpose. We know their purpose is to get a 10% or an 8% discount. Our purpose is to only, you know, offer an alternative, so we can offer 4%. Okay, so we both know that we have the same purpose for him or her to purchase this or to receive these items. State clearly what is being asked for. Give enough details so the recipient will understand why you cannot say no without coming out and saying no. John, unfortunately, our margin on this item is 7% already, or 2% already. So providing an 8% discount would cost the company thousands of dollars. All right. Did we say no flat out? No. But it's not the same as sending me an email and saying, hey, I need your shoe size. That's different. Always offer an alternative if possible. Here's some coupons. Here is what I will do for you instead. I mean, bad news messages I give all the time. Hey, Brian, can you do this? Unfortunately, I am doing this that week. I just sent one this morning. Unfortunately, I am teaching a class between 2 and 3:30 p.m. However, I'm not teaching at noon. Gave the no without saying no. Now, the last thing is don't apologize. The reason that you're in business is to make money. So giving up thousands of dollars for a good customer is not a bad thing. So don't say, I'm so sorry, bye. Just cordially, Brian. All right, so if we're thinking about audience, social media, and what do I want social media marketing to, there's two parts, purpose and audience. So you have to decide if you want to get into this idea of social media communications and effective communications in social media. You have to know purpose and audience. And once you decide your purpose and your audience, you can decide the platform. Understanding that Instagram is different than Facebook. Understanding that Twitter is completely different than, say, LinkedIn or YouTube. All of those are excellent ways to market your product or your world or to communicate effectively. But they each have different purposes. Facebook, I've been told by my kids that if you're not 40 plus or grandma doesn't make you send her pictures on Facebook, you're not on Facebook. However, the Instagram crowd is a completely different than that Facebook crowd. Once I decide purpose and audience, we can put together a social media campaign. Now, at the very beginning of this, and we're kind of coming full circle, Patrick asked me, what are some of the hindrances for collaboration in effective communication, especially, working on teams across the country and across the globe? Well, I suggested that the time aspect, the time zone aspect, is something that we don't think about enough. Once we've got those aspects figured out, how we're going to do this, when we're going to do this, how we're going to put these things together, we need to determine and have a plan. The first thing you have to do is we're going to determine the objectives, the purpose of this report or whatever. Determine the audience, determine the formats, gather the facts and data, determine the structure, determine who does what, then create a calendar. All of these things are all pre-writing stuff. Things that we should do prior to starting. Because what's going to happen is you're halfway through the project, and I can say this from personal experience more than once. We're halfway through the project and somebody says to me, what format are we doing this again? Oh, we didn't determine that. Or we have these 3 objectives, but what about these other 4? Oh, well, if we bring in these other 4, we have to go back and almost start over. But do we need to think about those other 4? Yeah. And finally, the who does what. I think we've all been in situations where a collaborative event happens, whether it's from being a student or working from the company. And what happens? We get almost done and somebody says, where's the charts? And somebody says, I thought you were doing that, Brian. Oh, I thought you were doing that, Jennifer. Jennifer and Brian look at Carl. Carl says, I wasn't doing the charts. I don't even know how to make charts. Write this stuff down. The key to collaborative work is effectively communicating. How do we effectively communicate? By writing stuff down. Even if we're going to go back and revise these lists, put together this first. Patrick, we're there. That's what I have for us today. We discussed the why. We talked a lot about audience awareness. We thought and talked about purpose, and we kind of gave some ideas on four different things on how to do things and get them across. So what do you have for me? If I can try, and if I don't know the answer, I will get it to Patrick, and we'll get it out to people as we can.
Okay, yeah, we did have some questions come in. Again, if you want to submit questions to me, just do it through the control panel, and I'll get them as many as I can to Brian before we end. First, somebody actually made a comment about read aloud function in Microsoft Word that they use before sending, before hitting send, to make sure that they are not missing any words and they understand my intent. So I really wasn't familiar with that function of Word, but I'm gonna have to check that out. I guess it's called the
Yeah,
read aloud function. So that sounds
yeah.
pretty cool.
It's one of the and I actually like that. This does actually two different things, and that we can kind of mention. The first thing, yeah, the read aloud is one of the newer functions that Word has put in. PDFs have been able, Acrobat have had that function for a while, so and Google Docs actually, the rumor is they're bringing in this function also. But this also makes a great point. Creating emails and messages in Microsoft Word or offline, if you will, prior to putting it and cutting and pasting into a document or into the email itself. That makes sense.
Next question: what is the first step of proofreading business writing documents?
That's a great question. I get this a lot, and outside of read aloud, obviously. No, I'm just kidding. The first step is this idea of reading it aloud. Once you read the message and the email aloud, if you have a colleague and if you have questions about it, you can read it to them aloud, or they can read it back to you aloud. One of the things that I encourage people to do, if they're in a position where they just need some strategies for editing or things like that, or to kind of to before they send it, I always encourage people to read it backwards, kind of. Start with the last paragraph and then go to the next to the last paragraph and go up. When we read it as we wrote it, oftentimes our brains will trick ourselves into, so we know what we wanted to write in our brain and we did it on our fingers. And so when we read it back again, our brains will still see what we wanted to write. That's why I encourage us to read it out loud, because that's a different function. But if we read it from the last paragraph up, it turns that part of the brain off, and we're able to actually see it for what it really is, usually.
Okay. With the busy culture today, we have approximately 8 to 10 seconds to capture readers' attention. What is your suggestion?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's in I mean, when I started in the business world, we talked about cold calling, and I worked in a phone center, and we were told the same thing. We were told you have 10 seconds. When they answer that phone, you have 10 seconds to convince them not to hang up with you. And I got to the point, and I actually got fired from this job fairly quickly, but I was yelling at them, hey, don't hang up. We don't have that in writing, but we can do something and that will bring them into it. And I go back to that subject line. Think about your subject line. If you had 8 words to write that will convince somebody to read your communications, what would those 8 words be? That's what I would suggest to you. We go from the subject line. I mean, I can open up my Gmail right now and all I see are subject lines. And then I actually have it kind of switch where I see subject lines first and then I see who sent it. So if Patrick sends me an email and I don't like his subject line, it goes down to the bottom of the day and you can ask him, it's true. So really think about your subject line. People take the subject line for granted. People take titles for granted too. If you're going to put something on social media or on a website, the titles matter the most. That's where you're going to convince your audience to read it.
Okay. In professional business writing, does the actual email format and style, such as spacing and visual presentation, vary from, say, a standard letter?
Yeah, I think it does. The first and most important part of that is in an email versus a standard letter, the email doesn't get indented. I think that if we're just going to go just to formatting and the basics of formatting, the email doesn't get indented. The letter, I believe, should. When you skip paragraphs in an email, you want to have at least one full space. So you have 3 or 4 lines, space, 3 or 4 lines, because that's what tells the reader we're on to a different quote unquote paragraph. In a letter, I would suggest there shouldn't be any space skipping. Other than, you could like 1.15 or 1.5 if you're going to skip every line, but we're not going to double the spaces between paragraphs in a standard letter. I also think too, in a standard letter, you need to obviously make sure that you have all of the dates, all of the dates, all the times, everything you need, you have to produce. In an email, that's provided for us. But we sometimes forget that, depending on the audience, sometimes we have to change something. I send emails to places that are, like we've talked about, time zones, that if they get the email, they say it's received at 22:22, and it immediately throws me into that idea of the time warp that I was talking about and that jet lag. So yeah, I do think at the very basics, indentation and skipping lines per paragraphs is our basic, is some of the differences to start.
Okay, we have time for one more question. How do I know when to use a comma and when to use a period?
That's a great question. So the best answer and the easiest answer I can give to you is a comma cannot separate 2 sentences, 2 complete sentences. So what can separate 2 complete sentences? A period. So when you're reading and you get to a place that you have a comma, usually people, especially English speakers, those who grew up in an English speaking home, we don't mess up the period very often, at all. We mess up the comma a lot. And so when we're reading and we're revising and we're reading through, when we get to a comma, I encourage you to look on both sides of that comma. If on both sides of the comma are complete sentences, put a period. If on both sides of the comma are not complete sentences, you're good. So it's all based on complete sentences.
Makes sense. Okay, well, that does conclude our time together. We would like to thank you for attending and encourage you to register now for Brian's full program, which will be delivered on Tuesday and Thursday, November 30th and December 2nd, 2021. This program will be delivered live via Zoom and is open for registration at the website on your screen. All of our fall 2021 programs are scheduled and open for registration, and our spring 2022 programs will be open for registration soon. To learn more about these and all of our programs, I encourage you to contact us at 330-672-3416 or at your training partner at kent.edu. We can bring all of our programs to your organizations virtually or in person and tailor them to fit your needs. You can join our extensive list of clients and bring Kent State to your organization. We also encourage you to register for our next webinar on Friday, November 12th, 2021, when we will be discussing strategies for leading the multi-generational team with Kent State facilitator Deborah Easton. During this webinar, we will discuss how each generation has handled the pandemic-induced adjustments in their work life, how the remnants of traditionalist mindset in the workplace affect the organization's ability to adapt to the new workplace, why people left their jobs and for what reason they will not return, and what management style is needed to coordinate a multi-generational, multi-located team. Registration for this webinar will be open soon. For those attending live, you will be asked to complete a short survey. Please complete this survey so that we can be assured that we are bringing you the most usable and relevant content possible. You will also receive a follow-up email early next week with a link to view a recording of today's webinar. On behalf of Kent State Center for Corporate and Professional Development and our presenter, Brian Harrell, thank you for attending today and have a great weekend.